Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We're the place where we try to take some really complex source material and, well, make it make sense.
That's the goal.
And today we're tackling something pretty fundamental. It sits right at the intersection of theology, philosophy, you name it.
That big question.
Yeah, the tension between knowing everything and needing to judge fairly. If an all-knowing being already knows every single outcome, every thought you'll ever have.
Knows the verdict, essentially.
Exactly. Then why have this huge public final judgment? Why not just handle it privately?
It feels almost redundant, doesn't it? From the creator's perspective anyway, if you know it all, why the big show?
Right.
But, the sources we're looking at today argue pretty strongly that it's not about God needing the information. It's about something else entirely.
It's about the structure of justice itself and maybe securing free will for everyone else.
Precisely. For the whole created order, humans, angels, everyone. The argument is that this public display, this trial, is absolutely essential.
Okay, so that's our focus. We're diving into sources that explore why this public judgment is seen as necessary. We'll touch on divine justice, how free will works in this model, and then get into the really specific stuff.
Yeah, the timing.
Yeah.
Especially the resurrection timing for a particular group, the ones whose faith, it needs to be publicly verified.
The verification subjects. Sounds intriguing.
It is, and controversial.
So our mission today, for you listening, is to unpack all this. We want to understand the logic behind why public judgment is considered so vital for keeping creation stable.
And then we're going to spend a good chunk of time looking at three different theories, three competing ideas about when these verification subjects actually get resurrected.
Competing but compelling views, you said.
Yeah, they each try to solve the puzzle, but they run into different problems. It's a real deep dive into cosmic justice, you could say.
Cosmic jurisprudence. I like that. Okay, let's get started. All right, let's lay the groundwork. Foundational principle number 1, according to our sources, God knows everything perfectly.
That's the baseline. Absolute omniscience. He knows who has real faith, who's faking it, who's loyal deep down, who's just going through the motions.
Even before anything was created. So from his viewpoint, yeah, the case is closed.
It is. He has that complete internal access to every heart, every mind. But the issue isn't with the judge.
It's with us, the created beings.
Exactly. The jury, if you will. The rest of creation. We don't have that divine insight.
Right, the creator-creature gap. We can't just look at someone and know their deepest intentions.
We can't. We're limited. We rely totally on what we can observe externally.
Actions, words.
Yeah, actions, words, the results of their choices over time, what the sources consistently call their fruit. That's all we have to go on. We can't see the spiritual reality directly.
Okay, so picture this. God, knowing everything perfectly, just issues a verdict. Sends someone to reward, someone else to punishment, but without showing the evidence publicly.
What happens then?
Well, for the rest of us watching, that could cause a huge problem, right? A crisis of faith, maybe.
It's what the sources call the crisis of potential misunderstanding. If God acts solely on his perfect private knowledge without revealing the why behind the sentence,
People might start to question his character.
exactly, they might think, hold on, that judgment seems unfair, or why did that person get saved? It doesn't add up based on what I saw.
And that little seed of doubt,
Yeah.
you're saying that's dangerous.
According to this framework, it's incredibly dangerous. Toxic, even, to the stability of free will across the universe.
How so?
The sources really emphasize this. Think about it. If God condemns even one person, let's say, the most obviously wicked individual imaginable, but doesn't publicly demonstrate why they deserve that fate. If other free beings, angels or humans watching this, start to harbor even a tiny doubt about the fairness of that one judgment.
It destabilizes their own foundation.
Yes. That doubt means they haven't fully accepted God's perfect justice. It leaves the door open, even just a crack, for them to think maybe my judgment is better, or maybe God isn't perfectly fair.
And that thought process is the root of potential future rebellion.
Correct. The ability to sin, in this view, is sustained by incomplete knowledge and lingering doubt, to lock in the loyalty and love of the universe forever, to make sin truly impossible in the future.
God has to show his work.
He has to publicly demonstrate the absolute fairness of every single verdict. Not for his own sake, he already knows. It's for our sake, for the final, absolute, unshakable conviction of all created beings.
So public judgment isn't about informing God, it's about informing and securing everyone else. It's like cosmic risk management.
That's a good way to put it. He has to reveal the evidence that the person's fruit, their actions and words, before passing sentence. And he has to establish the righteous publicly too.
Making the fairness undeniable to the whole universe.
Yes. The aim is to transition every free will from a state where rebellion is still possible because of doubt to a state where it's impossible because trust in God's perfect love and justice is complete and based on observed evidence.
Only then is free will truly secure.
Wow. Okay, so this whole structure, the need for observation, for time, for public verification, it wasn't just an afterthought. It seems like it was baked into the system from the beginning.
It seems so. And this leads us straight into the connection between this structure, free will, grace, and, well, the cross.
How does that link work?
Well, think about the alternative for a second. What if God had created us differently? What if he'd made beings who instantly, fully knew his infinite love and perfect justice right from the start?
Like complete spiritual knowledge downloaded at creation.
Exactly. The sources suggest two major things would follow. First, arguably, no need for the cross for that painful demonstration.
Okay.
But second, and maybe more fundamentally, there'd be no real choice, no genuine free will as we understand it.
Ah, right. Because if you have perfect knowledge of the consequences, the goodness of one path and the horror of the other, choice becomes almost meaningless. You can't rationally choose self-destruction. Precisely. It's like knowing with absolute certainty that touching the fire will cause unbearable agony. You just wouldn't do it. The choice is effectively removed by the completeness of the knowledge.
So the current system, the one we're in, requires a journey.
It does. It's structured so that creatures have to actively seek God to really know him deeply. Then they have to know him through experience and relationship to truly love him.
And it's that love, born from knowledge and seeking, that eventually makes sin impossible.
That's the idea.
Yeah.
Once that love is fully formed and secured, based on understanding his character, sin becomes unthinkable. It's a progression. That's the engine of freedom in this model.
But hang on, doesn't that sound a bit like God is deliberately holding back, creating us in a state of relative ignorance just to make choice possible? Isn't that problematic?
That's a really important question, and the sources tackle it head on. The argument isn't that God is withholding something essential for salvation. It's not about trickery. It's about structuring reality so that genuine rejection is possible. You see, the moment a creature chooses to turn away from that path of seeking God,
They activate something.
they activate what the sources call the rejection mechanism. And it's fueled primarily by self-serving desire. Lust, in the broad sense, yokshim, as the source might put it if it were in Korean, meaning excessive desire or greed.
So choosing my own desires over seeking God starts a downward spiral.
Yes. As that choice is reinforced, the creature effectively blinds themselves spiritually. The sources argue that this willful rejection actually leads to an inability to perceive God's love and justice clearly.
And that blindness, paradoxically, preserves their freedom to keep rejecting him.
Correct. They aren't forced into ignorance by God. They choose ignorance as a consequence of prioritizing their own desires. It maintains their ability to oppose him because they can no longer fully grasp what they're opposing.
Wow, okay. And this is where the cross comes in, as the ultimate countermeasure.
Exactly. Given this structure, this possibility of self-chosen blindness and rejection, God did something radical. The sources describe the cross as God pouring out everything he had.
To break through that blindness.
Yes, to combat the rejection, to prevent creatures from making that final, irrevocable turn away from his grace, which is always available. And the cross served two massive intertwined purposes, tying back to our earlier discussion on public justice.
Purpose number one.
Proof. Undeniable proof. The cross was the ultimate, universally visible demonstration of God's character, his infinite love and being willing to suffer that for us, and his absolute justice in showing that sin has a terrible cost that must be paid.
So after the cross, no one could credibly say, I didn't know, or God isn't fair.
That's the argument. It removes plausible deniability.
And the second purpose, you mentioned it assigns value to creation. That's quite a concept.
It really is. It uses this powerful analogy. Think about it. To an all-powerful creator, the physical universe, all its laws, all its inhabitants, it's ultimately replaceable, isn't it?
In a sense, yeah. He could just make another one.
It could be seen as, well, almost meaningless in the face of infinite power, disposable. But the cross, according to this view, changes that completely.
How does that specific act make the disposable valuable?
Because of the cost to God, the sources emphasize the separation. The Father and the Son, that eternal indivisible unity, experiencing a form of abandonment, of being cut off from each other.
To pay the price for our rejection.
Yes, The tearing apart of that essential eternal bond within the Godhead itself was the cost. It wasn't just physical suffering, it was relational, spiritual agony at the highest conceivable level.
So creation becomes precious, not because of what it is, but because of the price he paid for it.
That's it. Like the analogy you mentioned earlier, the broken, worthless toy clutched by a beloved child as they die.
The parent cherishes the toy afterward, not for the toy's sake, but because the child loved it. The child's sacrifice gives it value.
Exactly. The blood of the Son, the cost of the cross, permeates creation, making it infinitely precious to the Father. It transforms creation from a potentially transient blueprint into something eternally significant, something worth the whole grand public process of judgment and restoration we're discussing.
Wow. Okay, that immense cost, that value assigned by the cross, it sets the stage perfectly for this next group. The really challenging ones, the verification subjects.
Yes, these are the individuals who pose a unique problem for this system of public justice.
We're talking about people who confess faith, who seem to turn to God, but literally right at the end of their lives.
Exactly. The classic example always cited is the thief, the evildoer on the cross next to Jesus. He says, "Remember me," and Jesus promises him paradise.
But he had no time to live out that faith, to produce any fruit, any actions or words that the rest of creation could see.
None whatsoever. And that creates the paradox. God, of course, knows. He knows if that confession was absolutely genuine or just a last-ditch foxhole conversion.
But if God just acts on that private knowledge and, say, welcomes that person into eternal reward immediately,
What does the watching universe see?
they see someone seemingly getting a pass without the required public evidence, it could undermine the very principle we just established.
Right, that principle of needing visible proof to secure everyone else's free will and understanding of God's justice, it might lead to doubt. Was God just lenient there? Does the rule not always apply?
So for the sake of cosmic stability, even if God knows their heart is true, these individuals need more time.
They need what the sources call a lifespan, some period, some context where their true spiritual substance can be publicly revealed. They need an opportunity to demonstrate, through actions, whether that last-minute faith was real.
They need to produce fruit, even if it's posthumously, in a sense.
In a sense, yes. The integrity of God's character, so painstakingly proven on the cross, demands that he follows his own established rules for public justice. No shortcuts, even for deathbed conversions. The verification subject needs a scenario to play out their choice visibly.
So this verification isn't really about their salvation status, which God knows, but about the final security of everyone else's free will.
Absolutely. It all connects back. The ultimate stability of the universe, the final elimination of sin's possibility, relies on God seeing everything through consistently. Every promise kept, every judgment executed transparently.
Especially those final decisive acts like dealing with Satan and ultimately wicked.
Yes, if God were to waver even slightly in those final demonstrations of justice, say, he didn't follow through on casting Satan into the lake of fire. As promised, the sources argued that the trust built by the cross could be shaken. Doubt could creep back in.
So the completion of free will for all creation is tied directly to these final acts of judgment being carried out publicly and definitively. When do the sources suggest this final locking in of free will occurs?
This is where we see a key point of divergence. The author of the primary source we're drawing on seems convinced that the first resurrection is the pivotal moment.
The resurrection of the saints and martyrs at the beginning of the millennium?
Yes. That event, in this view, completes the public proof of God's love and justice, removes the potential for sin definitively, and secures universal free will forever.
But you said that's not the only view.
Correct. The source acknowledges that other theological perspectives tie that final security and the ultimate judgment of the wicked not to the first resurrection, but to the great white throne judgment.
Which happens 1,000 years later, right at the very end.
Exactly. And this difference in timing, when universal free will is finally and irrevocably secured, has massive implications for how you handle the verification subjects.
Because it dictates when they need to have their public demonstration.
Precisely. If security comes at the first resurrection, their verification needs to happen before or during the millennium. If it only comes at the great white throne, maybe their resurrection can be delayed. This timing issue is the crux of the next major debate.
Makes total sense. The timing of the final lock determines the timing requirements for everyone involved, especially those needing verification. Okay, let's dive into that core debate then. The big question. When exactly do these verification subjects, the folks needing that public lifespan to prove their last-minute faith, get resurrected?
Right, and we have three main contenders, each trying to solve that verification problem while staying consistent with other eschatological events. But, as you'll see, each one bumps up against problems, usually concerning fairness or just basic logistics.
Let's take them one by one. What's view number one? The earliest timing.
Resurrection at the first resurrection.
Okay, so this view proposes that these verification subjects are actually resurrected right alongside the martyrs, the ruling saints, all those blessed folks who participate in the first resurrection.
So, at the very beginning of the 1,000-year kingdom.
Exactly, concurrent with the ruling class.
But wait, there's a catch, right? They don't get the same kind of body. Our sources emphasize that.
That is the absolutely critical distinction here. The martyrs and rulers, they receive the spiritual body, the glorified, immortal, incorruptible body fit for reigning with Christ, the pneumatikos body.
Okay.
But the verification subjects, they still need to live out their proof during the millennium. They need a lifespan, essentially, so that they can't get that instant immortality. They receive what the sources call a soulful body, the psychikos body.
A soulful body. What does that mean practically? Are they still humanish? Mortal?
It means they're resurrected into a physical body that's still fundamentally subject to life's processes, although vastly improved because the curse is lifted during the millennium.
So long lifespans.
Extremely long, yes. The sources mention living as long as trees, but they're not inherently immortal right away.
Right.
They can still marry, have children, plant crops, build homes. They live as citizens of the kingdom, not rulers. Think maybe like Lazarus being raised, still wrapped in burial cloths, still mortal, but alive again.
Okay, so view one puts them in the millennium as citizens, resurrected at the start. Consequence: they get 1,000 years of peace, prosperity, curse-free living.
Which sounds great, right? But here's the major snag. The problem of justice.
If these are the people who needed verification, whose faith was professed only at the last second.
Exactly. How is it fair or just for them to immediately receive 1,000 years of utopian bliss, having families, enjoying this incredible blessing when compared to the martyrs?
The martyrs who suffered, died horribly, lost everything for their faith. And their reward is ruling, yes, but these other folks seem to get an awfully sweet deal for unproven faith.
It looks like a massive imbalance, doesn't it? It raises serious questions about divine equity. Why such a huge reward for what appears to the watching universe as minimal and unverified commitment?
How do supporters of view one handle that?
Well, they have to argue that the 1,000 years is their verification period. Living faithfully during the millennium becomes the proof. And the immense grace they receive is just, well, God being incredibly generous. But that perceived unfairness, that justice issue, remains the big challenge for this view.
Okay. What about view two? Does it solve the justice problem?
Resurrection at the beginning of the 1,000-year kingdom, a separate event.
View two tries to address the awkwardness of lumping the verification subjects in with the ruling saints at the same event. It suggests there's a separate large-scale resurrection specifically for these folks, also happening right at the start of the millennium.
So, still resurrected at the beginning of the 1,000 years, still getting the soulful psychikos body.
Yes, same timing, same body type. They still become citizens, live long lives, have families, enjoy the peace.
Okay, so the consequence is identical to view one in terms of their experience.
Pretty much. It avoids mixing them with the first resurrection proper, which some find cleaner logistically.
Does it solve the justice problem?
Not really. It inherits the exact same, very difficult problem of justice. They still get what looks like an enormous 1,000-year reward for faith that required verification. Why the immediate utopia compared to those who suffered?
Right. And view two introduces a new problem, doesn't it? A logistical one.
It does. Now you have to account for another major resurrection event. You've got the first resurrection for the rulers, the great white throne resurrection for the wicked dead, and now this third massive resurrection of verification subjects at the start of the millennium.
That's not explicitly mentioned in most standard readings of, say, Revelation, is it?
It requires more theological legwork to justify scripturally. It adds complexity, proposing at least 3 distinct resurrection phases, making the whole end-time sequence potentially more convoluted.
Okay, so views 1 and 2 put them in the millennium, but struggle with justice and/or logistics. What about view 3? Does it avoid granting them the millennium?
Resurrection at the end of the 1,000-year kingdom, just before judgment.
View 3 takes a completely different tack. It says, let's solve the justice problem by not giving them the 1,000 years of blessing. It proposes they're resurrected much later, right at the end of the millennium, just before the final Great White Throne Judgment.
Okay, so the rationale is clear. Resurrect them then, and they bypass the millennial kingdom entirely. They don't get the reward, they just face judgment based on their earlier last-minute confession.
Exactly. It seems to solve the justice problem regarding the millennium reward.
But logistically, this one seems to create a huge vacuum, doesn't it?
A massive one. This is the view's major logistical problem. If the verification subjects aren't the citizens of the 1,000-year kingdom, then who is?
Right. Who are all those people described as living long lives, building houses, planting vineyards, having children during that 1,000 years?
If you exclude the verification subjects, you're left primarily with only those mortals who physically survived the tribulation period and walked into the millennium in their natural bodies.
Could that group alone account for the populated nations described during the millennium, especially the vast numbers involved in the final rebellion?
It's a stretch for many theologians. It seems to require an enormous population boom from a relatively small starting group. It makes the millennium feel underpopulated, perhaps.
And it still doesn't entirely solve the resurrection logistics, does it?
Yeah.
If they're raised at the end, are they raised with the wicked dead, or is it yet another separate resurrection event just for them right before the Great White Throne?
Good point. It could still imply multiple distinct resurrection events packed tightly at the end, which again adds complexity.
So it seems like each view fixes one problem only to create another. View 1 and 2 have justice issues. View 3 has major logistical and population issues for the millennium itself.
That's the dilemma. Each perspective is trying to honor the need for public verification while fitting into the broader eschatological timeline, but they all hit significant roadblocks. The author we're focusing on seems to lean towards a solution that involves the earliest resurrection, but tries to address the justice concern through what happens at the end of the millennium.
Ah, okay. So that brings us to the citizens themselves and the final test.
Right, so given the problems with View 3 excluding the verification subjects, the focus shifts back to who the citizens of the 1,000-year kingdom actually are. The primary group seems to be those who survive the tribulation.
Yes, the mortals who enter the kingdom alive in their natural, albeit long-living bodies, they multiply over the 1,000 years, experiencing this unprecedented era of peace, health, prosperity.
With Jesus and the resurrected saints ruling directly, it's maximum grace given physically on earth.
An incredible environment, perfect conditions, essentially.
But it doesn't last unchallenged. Crucially, this period ends with that final test, the Gog and Magog rebellion. Correct. When the 1,000 years are up, Satan is released for a short time, and the sources paint a pretty grim picture of what happens next.
Despite a millennium of peace and divine rule, most people fall for it.
The indication is that the vast majority of these citizens who knew nothing but blessing their entire lives are almost instantly deceived by Satan. They gather and march against the holy city, against Christ and the saints.
Wow. After 1,000 years of grace, that final rebellion is key then for understanding the different outcomes and this idea of divine equity.
Absolutely. Because out of that final conflict emerged two distinct groups from the millennial citizenry, and their fates highlight the principles of justice and responsibility.
Okay, group 1.
First, there's the faithful minority. These are the millennial citizens who, despite the overwhelming tide of rebellion, remain loyal to Christ. They stand against Satan's forces, potentially risking their lives.
They become, in effect, martyrs of the millennium.
That's how the sources frame it. They chose faith even when surrounded by opposition after having lived through the peace. Their reward, ultimately, is entry into the new earth, the eternal state after the final judgment.
And the sources suggest their 1,000 years of peace was, in itself, a kind of reward for making it into the kingdom alive. Their final act of loyalty secures their place in eternity, even though they didn't rule like the resurrected saints.
Exactly. Their path was different, but their faithfulness is honored.
Okay, then there's the other group, the big one.
The opposing majority. This is the massive group of citizens who enjoyed the absolute peak of God's earthly grace, 1,000 years of peace, long life, health, security, direct exposure to divine rule.
Everything you could possibly want.
Everything. Yet when the final, single, significant temptation arises, they choose rebellion. They turn against the very source of all their blessings.
And this is where that principle you mentioned earlier comes crashing down. Increased responsibility.
Precisely. The sources argue forcefully that those who actively oppose Jesus after receiving such an overwhelming, undeniable, 1,000-year demonstration of his goodness and grace, They face the most severe judgment imaginable.
Their accountability is directly proportional to the grace they received and rejected.
Exactly. The sheer weight of their condemnation reflects the staggering amount of light and blessing they turned their backs on. That 1,000 years of peace wasn't just a free ride. It was an investment by God, intended to solidify their loyalty.
And when they fail that final clear-cut test,
That period of grace flips. It becomes the basis for their heightened judgment responsibility. They were given the most, knew the most experientially, and still chose darkness. The principle is, to whom much is given, much will be required.
so this ties all the way back to the beginning, the need for justice, but an equitable justice.
Yes. God is just, the sources insist, and operates on this principle of equity. He holds people accountable based on what they knew and experienced.
He demands more from those who receive the incredible grace of the millennium.
But crucially, he doesn't demand responsibility beyond the grace that was actually provided, whether it's the martyrs, the verification subjects, whenever they are resurrected and tested, or these millennial citizens. Each group is judged on a scale calibrated to their specific opportunities and knowledge.
And the millennium, especially that final rebellion, serves as the ultimate, undeniable proof that even perfect external conditions won't override a free will determined to choose self-interest over God.
It seems to be the final public demonstration closing that loop. #tag outro.
Okay, wow. We've covered a lot of ground today, from deep philosophical tensions to some really intricate end times mechanics.
It's heavy stuff.
Yeah, but the core thread seems clear.
Oh.
Public judgment is presented as necessary, not because God needs to figure things out, but for the rest of us, for the created universe to witness undeniable justice and have its free will fully secured.
And the cross stands as the event that defines the infinite value placed on that freedom and the incredible cost paid to make it possible and secure it.
And then we got into the weeds of resurrection timing, especially for those verification subjects. It's incredibly complex, isn't it?
It really is, and it all seems to hinge on this balancing act, maintaining God's perfect, demonstrable justice or divine equity, while also fulfilling the need for public verification for everyone.
Every timeline proposed has to somehow justly account for the suffering martyr, the faithful person who lives through it all, and the person whose faith only appeared at the very last moment.
It's a theological tightrope walk.
So, for you listening, maybe the next time you think about final judgment, remember this deep dive. It's not just a simple sorting of who's in and who's out.
No, it's about the intricate mathematics, you might say, of divine equity.
Yeah. How does God's infinite, perfect knowledge square up with our finite, creaturely need to see and experience justice being done fairly and transparently?
And perhaps the most profound takeaway, the final thought to leave you with, is this principle we kept coming back to.
The connection between knowledge and responsibility.
Exactly. The knowledge, the grace, the light, whatever you want to call it, that we receive or maybe that we reject in this life, it directly shapes the weight of responsibility we carry forward.
An infinitely just God demands fairness. And fairness means accountability is directly tied to opportunity and understanding. The more light you've been given,
The greater the expectation, the greater the responsibility when you stand before that final judgment, the white throne. It's something to really reflect on.
definitely something to ponder. What weight of grace are we carrying today? Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.
See you next time.